Hello, and thank you for joining us for episode 10 of Proofpoint, the podcast by Caribbean User Experience Q. My name is Suzette Merrill, and I will be your host. Proofpoint, the podcast, aims to give focus to user experience philosophy, which simply supports that we are all users of something. That user experience design process is multidimensional and is not solely digitalization, technology, or computation, but is also how we design customer, consumer, and employee services, systems, workspaces, communications, apps, and websites, and what everyday people and organizations can do to achieve mutually beneficial outcomes. Today's topic under the theme User Experience is Everywhere will talk through the battleground of broadcast media versus new media. To give voice to this topic, we have with us Jade Brown, a broadcast media professional for 10 years, who for the last 3.5 years has been a news editor and anchor with your Shift Changer Media House in St. Lucia. Welcome, Jade, to this episode 10 of Proof for the Podcast by Caribbean User Experience Q. We're very happy to have you here. We're excited about the discussion. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Suzette. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm really excited for this discourse. I think that there's a lot that we can touch on. As you said, my name is Jade Brown. I am a news director slash editor and anchor at NBC Prime. NBC Prime is the flagship of NBC Television and Real FM, of course, in St. Lucia. This is a position which I've held for the past 3.5 years. Very mother of one. My daughter is 11 years old, student of St. Joseph's Convent, UK born. I grew up in Canaries, reside in Castries. Um, that's pretty much about me. I'm very much into my work, into the gym, and my home. Yeah, so those three things I would say make me who I am.
Okay, so Jade, tell us about how you moved and ended up doing broadcasting. Can you let us?
Okay. It's an interesting story. I um I basically grew up in a household that where everybody was involved in childcare. My mom owned a nursery in the UK, and I started off working there. I actually started off cleaning, and then I went into the kitchen, and then I started working with the children. She encouraged me to get my qualifications in that field, which is early childhood developmental care. I specifically trained to work with children with special educational needs. After receiving that qualification, I had moved to St. Lucia because I had my daughter. That was back in 2009. I moved back to St. Lucia with Jadelle, and I was unemployed for some time. Worked in the tourism industry for a few weeks. It was not for me. I don't think I did not have that level of patience at that time. So I was actively searching for a new job. I saw an advertisement on HTS where they were looking for a junior reporter. And I remember I lived in Sufra at the time. I said, okay, that's my job. So I went onto the interview and I got the job. I received a lot of training throughout my years from great names like Andrew Paul, Winston Springer Jr., of course, Jerry George, who is legendary in this field. I also did a short course with the PR Academy. And now I am pursuing a course of study with the London School of Journalism. So, yeah, this is why I'm here right now.
Excellent,
Yes.
excellent. Now, let's start off by asking the question, what are some of the myths the persons have about somebody working in the broadcast media field?
Would say is financial. They believe that if you work in media, you bring home a hefty salary, like your paycheck is huge. And that is not the case. It is a career path that I would encourage people to pursue. I think that it can be quite rewarding. However, in our Caribbean landscape, it is quite difficult, especially if you are a news reporter and not especially trained in the field. It's quite difficult to get that salary where you can say, okay, I'm making a competitive salary. You really have to put in the work. There's a lot of elbow grease that needs to go in there, and years to the service because people respect the amount of years and experience that you have. That is one myth. Another would be that we're supposed to remain um, objective all the time. And especially in the Caribbean, they believe that reporters are not entitled to their own opinions on matters. And quite the opposite. We're very opinionated, and we see situations and we see issues, public issues, from a different perspective. We see it both from the perspective of the viewer and from the perspective of the individuals, whether it be technocrats, politicians, businessmen and women, criminals, you name it. We see it from all angles. And of course, we'll have our own. The important thing is not to put or not to confuse the message by putting in your own opinion into the work. However, if you look at international media trends, right now, we know that Fox is a conservative station, whereas CNN is more liberal, more social. You understand? I think that this is the direction that we're going into. But those are two of the main myths. And they also believe that we're not supposed to have our own lives. So people would see me in public and they would assume that I'm supposed to always have, airs and graces.
Yeah.
But they misunderstand. I'm a young person from Canaries. So if you see me in Canaries, most of the time I don't have shoes on my feet, or I'm in the river, or I wash my clothes in my hand, or I'm cooking on free stones. And they'll be like, that's Jade Brown. You're not there, So and it's quite sweet, but you have to also understand that we live very full lives, and there are many facets to our lives as journalists.
Okay, of course, you're human beings.
Yes, yes, yes.
I think sometimes people just see you sometimes as their problem solver,
Yes,
especially when you're in a specific discipline.
right,
And
right.
on that, let us move now to the broadcast media landscape.
Sure.
Um, I mean, we have migrated from very traditional broadcast media, strictly being radio and television. I mean, radio has taken on a different form altogether. Um, and of course, now you have the electronic, you have the online methodologies now that you can disseminate information. How has it been for NBC in that journey?
Just joined the NBC family. It was quite different. We were at a stage in technology wherein you would notice that more people were gravitating towards social media for to consume their news content. So we had to move with the time. In fact, we had to move ahead because we wanted to be the first. We wanted to ensure that we got the viewers online. We knew that NBC had to contend with giants, media giants. Like, the thing that we had to do was change the time of our broadcast. We found is that our viewers would subscribe to or tune into the stations to get the top stories. Your top stories will be, of course, in your first half of the broadcast. So when they consume that at DBS and HTS, there's a lag because there's an hour-long newscast. We also understood that people the attention span of many people is quite small. So we had to get that attention. So we decided that news had to be half an hour long. There is no need for news on a Caribbean island, as small as St. Lucia, to be an hour long. Because what you would find is that there would be a drop in quality. NBC always had our newscast, but we wanted to keep it that way. It was important that we kept it that way. Um, to my previous point, we had to ensure that we came on at a time where people had already seen what the top news stories were on the competing stations, or we were waiting for the top news stories on the station that would come on at 8 o'clock. So 7:30, that was the magic time for us. That's number one. Number two, in terms of technology and moving with the times, we needed to get that online audience. We needed to get them with us. So we invested a lot in our Facebook, Instagram, Twitter pages. Especially our Facebook page. The other thing that we did was ensure that we went live with most, if not all, of our programming. This is where all generations, in fact, especially we've noticed working mothers and working women between the ages of 28 to 45, this is where they consume their content. So that was a few of the things that we had to do to ensure that we stayed ahead of the time.
Exactly. You touched on the area of new media. So
Mm.
we are now talking about blogging, microblogging. You have people
Yes.
creating new platforms on their own. You have people sharing their stories in the way they can best do it in a very organic and natural way. And you did make mention that you felt it necessary to not extend your broadcast to no more than 30 minutes because it's not necessary. And you have to make decisions every day as to what stories you tell. How do you
Yes.
do that? What is the thought process in
Okay.
that?
Well, this is the formula. I I think now we could share it for us at NBC. When I came in, I said, okay, my mandate was to change the news. So then I saw, okay, I need to bring in a team. I'll touch on that in a bit. But the important thing is when I got that team of, I call them legends. These are people who have been in the industry. These are people who know the field and know their craft. What I did is ensure that they have their own brand. It's important as any individual in any field that you have your brand. You need to have brand awareness and you need to know how to package and sell your brand. So, with our news reporters, and I like to call them senior correspondents, our senior correspondents each have their niche. So, if we have 30 minutes to tell a few stories, we have about 6 stories per newscast. We have 30 minutes to do that. We cannot be everywhere. But what we can do is touch on the salient matters of the day. By doing so, we get our senior correspondents to focus on their fields. Right now, Cecile Actil, she's a senior correspondent. Everybody knows that Cecile Actil is grassroots stories. Cecile is on the ground with the people, getting those stories. Some people might call it rural stories, pandemonium. She even got a nickname, pandemonium in the streets. That is Cecile.
Yeah.
But what is important is that she has become a household name for her grassroots story. So that is the area that she concentrates on only. She might cover crime also, but her angle is always as a voice of the people. Miguel Favre is our senior investigative correspondent, and he's also the political correspondent. So when you see matters, and NBC has a knack for revealing really hard truths. We
Correct.
are very bold when
I've
it
seen.
comes to the stories that we produce. Miguel is the guy. Any one of us can do it, but I like to go to Miguel because this is his area of expertise. When it comes to political matters, if you need somebody to quote dates from the elections back in 1980, whatever, that would be Miguel. So he's the political correspondent. And then we have Rihani. Rihanna has a way of deciphering very complex, complicated, technical jargon and making it readable, listenable, relatable for the viewers. That we find is very important. That's Rihanna. Rihanna covers stories like health, anything to do on COVID, which is a very big story. I mean, topic right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. I know I can go to Rihanna, I can call him now and say, hey, how many cases did we have last week? He will tell me. How many cases do we have today? He will let me know. Rihanna might as well have been working in the Ministry of Health because he's that good. So that is what we did in terms of our news packaging. That is how we put it all together. And I find that the formula works. We ensure my reporters will give me 3 stories per day, 2 to 3 stories per day. The quota is 3. And yeah, so we ensure that there's a good mix. I come in with stories on women, stories on children, stories on community. That is my niche. And I think that stems from my background in childcare, dealing with parents, dealing with women's issues. I consider myself quite the feminist. So I like to focus on those stories. And I think that if more TV stations, although I don't really want them to do that because they'll be competing with us, but if you focus on your brand and understand
Mm.
that yes, you have news reporters, yes, they work for your company, but these are people, these are entities, these are businesses, these are brands. So if you invest in that brand, each and every one of your staff, then I think that your quality will increase. I think that your respect in the field of obviously people have more respect for you and for
Come to
what
the end
you
of
do.
part one. Thank you for listening. Look out for notification of our second part this coming Tuesday.